Welcome to the Coach Dave Love podcast with NBA shooting coach Dave Love and your host, Matt Robertson, exploring the cutting edge of evidence-based shooting development in basketball today, from shooting form to skill acquisition to shot metrics. This is the Coach Dave Love podcast.
Welcome to the Coach Dave Love podcast. I am your host, Matt Robertson, and with me, as always, NBA shooting coach Dave Love. Dave, what's going on today?
Not so much, Matty. You just every time your little pre-show routine just cracks me up. It makes me laugh, and I can't even focus on what you're saying. I'm just giggling inside about it.
Just know I'm mostly saying the same thing every time, so feel free to have that moment away. How are you? Where are you, I should ask?
I am in Dallas. I guess we're approaching mid-June now. And so I'm back in Dallas for week 2 of pre-draft workouts and, coincidentally, NBA finals. And, that's where I am.
Is this your first NBA finals with a team you are a part of?
This is not only that, it's actually my first playoffs that my first year in the NBA with the Phoenix Suns. They went to the Western Final, but I wasn't involved with that. My duties were sort of done at the end of the regular season, and then in Cleveland and Orlando, we didn't make the playoffs any of those years. So this is my first time being involved in basketball in May or June. And to be still involved in mid-June is only 2 teams get to do this, and the Mavs are one of them.
That is expert commentary from your boy, Coach Dave Love. Dave, that's awesome. I love that. Let's kind of jump into the episode for today. And we've done a bunch of mentions about how Dave Love from 2024 is so much better than Dave Love from 2014, who's so much better than Dave Love from 2004. This is a great look at kind of what you were doing then versus what you're doing now. Do you want to tease the future just a dash, or do you want me to just gloss over and keep going?
We'll tease it a little bit, I think, as we kind of get into the where are we now part of it. And what I would love for you, especially on I've got this broken up into those basically the same 3 categories. I've got them marked as like pre-NBA, early NBA, and sort of where I'd say now, which kind of started around meeting Chris Oliver in about 2017-18 is the beginning of what I'm calling now. Especially in the pre-NBA, I would love you to challenge me to get specific about what I did and why it may not have been the best way to do things. Because I think, based on what I see from a lot of coaches, I think that's where most people are. And I don't want I'm actually proud of that, even though I would never go back to coach like that. It was part of my journey to get where, starting off as simply as I did, gave me the tools to build off of. And I think that's where we have to start. And I would guess that a lot of people's progressions or growth will follow a similar kind of path of exploration. So challenge me to kind of get specific, especially in this first little group that we talk about.
I mean, as we often discuss, development is not linear. And I'm curious to kind of see from your development what that looks like, where you're finding the edges early versus where you kind of the spot shooting, as it were, that you hung on to for as long as you could before you were like, okay, I got to give that up. It's actually not good or not optimal. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, it's funny you use the word linear, because that's a great word for early Dave Love, everything was very, very linear. And so, yeah, we'll go into all of that. Where do you want to start?
So pre-NBA, I know that we talked about working with the U of Calgary guys and girls to kind of start out. Why don't you start with that kind of time period, the kinds of things you were doing, how you were spending your time, and the purpose of your workouts?
Yeah. So at that point, I feel like I would have said I understood shooting mechanics pretty well. But I realized with the first player that I worked with, which would have been around like the first higher level player, college, university level player, I realized in the first workout, I don't have any bridge between form shooting and game shooting. And I instinctively knew I can't just teach them how to form shoot and then expect them to figure out how to translate that. I can't teach them at 0 or 1% game speed and then expect them to get it at 100% game speed. That's my responsibility, but I had none of those tools. And so I think the other part of my early journey was, even though I felt like I knew shooting mechanics, which is comical for me to look back at it and think like, no, you didn't. I was really comfortable with a player's lower body and their feet. Like I was really comfortable with my understanding of that. But the stuff within the hand and the release and the set point, that was all too nuanced. And while I feel like I knew what I wanted to have happen, I couldn't necessarily see what was actually happening with players, and I didn't necessarily know the cause and effect of all of that. So I just didn't have enough experience, and so I felt like I was pretty good at helping people that had bad balance, and that I was pretty good at teaching a form shooting drill that hopefully that drill helped a player, because my coaching probably wasn't.
I was going to ask, so when you talk about, okay, working on that 0 1%, not the game representative piece, but the form shooting piece, what was the drill that you were doing at that time? Be specific.
It would have been one hand form shooting. Like I was trying to avoid saying the traditional, because what was traditional for me might not be traditional for somebody else, as we kind of talked about in the geography of shooting mini pod, I think.
Yes, sir.
And so I learned in about my mid to late teens, hand under the ball, guide hand behind your back. That was the version of form shooting that I learned, and lifting up close to the body, and so the first college player that I worked with, his name's Josh Feast. He'll probably end up being on the podcast at some point, and we can break this down a little bit more. But he spent weeks like doing basically form shooting spots with his shooting hand under the ball and his guide hand behind his back, mastering like this movement. And because I didn't have enough experience with players to tell him what he was doing well or what he was doing wrong with that part of his body, I was very keyed in on his feet, and then I was hoping that the drill was teaching him what he needed to learn. And I got lucky, where apparently Josh was talented enough, and the drill might have accidentally guided him towards what he needed to be guided towards, because he went from I think it was 54% from the free throw line in his freshman year in college to 72, became an 80+% free throw shooter and a 40% 3-point shooter. And I thought I was the man. I thought I could help anybody. And now I look back and oh, Dave, you adorable idiot. You really just lucked into a talented player that that was able to infer what you hoped the drills were going to teach him without you knowing yourself. But what did kind of what working with Josh taught me is I needed to bridge the gap, and so I ended up coming up with a progression of probably two drills to now, okay, instead of going from 1% to 100, I'm now going to get you from 1 to 33 to 66 to 100, and hope that's enough of a bridge for you. And it's funny because I don't think I use. I'm trying to think what the second drill might have been. I remember the first one, but I mean, the most ultra basic, simple drills that can be imagined still.
I mean, give yourself a little bit of credit because balance is a big part of shooting, you know? So if his balance was poor, you're being keyed into that, at least contributed to some of his success, along with the massive rote block practice of ball in front of your face, ball above your forehead, kind of follow through. There is some small benefit to that, just block practicing the absolute snot or the absolute poop out of it if you're Phil Beckner.
Yeah. The poop ton. Now, did Phil come out? Did Phil start the poop?
He said
it was in that episode, but
he said, "Pardon my crass language" or something like that, and said "crap," which led to us sort of accusing him of being, you know, causing us to have a language warning button on our feed. So, you know,
I feel like we had said a poop ton in an episode just before that one.
Okay.
I'm not certain on that. Anyhow, let's spend before we take a commercial break. Let's I'm trying to think, like, other than just what I would want someone to do based on what I know now. If somebody's kind of at that level where they're doing similar things to what I was doing earlier in my career, like where would I encourage them to grow? And as I've mentioned, just about everything was block practice. Like, stand here, do this 10 times. Move here to this spot, do this 10 times. And very little variation. I think, as we've alluded to in other episodes, okay, if you're going to be there, then at least change the distance. So find that appropriate level of challenge for distance and just play within those two steps. Like, where's the easy, where's the mid-range, where's the challenging level? Easy, mid-range, challenging, mid-range, easy. Like, bounce around between those distances, so at least you're teaching some adaptability. And then I think the first major step that I took out of that early form of Dave Love was moving away from the hand under the ball form shooting and realizing we are never in that position in a game. And so I developed the isolation drill, ABC, slow to quick, in a workout with a guy named Adam Ford. I can still remember exactly where I was standing when I came up with the idea of ABC, which I'm sure other people were doing in other parts of the world, but I had no access to those people. So this was a unique idea to myself in 2006, or would it have been that? Yeah, probably be in about that range, and just starting to be in game body positions instead of with your hand behind your back and your shooting hand underneath the basketball.
Can you remember anything? Again, I don't want to belabor this if you can't remember, but the 33% and the 66% bridging that you were doing, do you remember anything about those drills?
Yeah, I remember the 33%, which I might mix in for 2 minutes with one player per year now. But it was a Dave Love staple back in the day where I would roll the ball to a player, like making them move a step or two. So not directly at them, but I would roll the ball along the floor where they had to like shuffle to get behind. And my logic, my idea on this was, I'm going to make you move. And so your feet are going to be out of position. And then when I want you to beat the ball to the spot, and when the ball gets there, I want your feet to be in a stable, balanced position. And then I want you to pick up and I want you to do your one-hand form shooting. That, again, the game body position we're never in. But at least I thought to layer that with a movement drill. And then it would be, instead of rolling the ball, it would have been a slow bounce pass where they still have to jump behind it. Now they have a little bit less time to get set up, and then into a slow bounce pass. And that was kind of the first drill that I quote unquote invented. Not claiming that other people hadn't done that, but there was no YouTube back then. It was me with a player coming up with how do I make this more challenging for them, and that was the first drill that I remember creating. The 66% drill. I had another one that I used to do. I called drop in the bucket, and I think that came a little bit later, but just for the sake of trying to help people, I'll give you an explanation. It would basically be, the set point would be that I would have the player start with their body in the set point, but without the basketball in their hand. And then I would try and like lob the ball so that I almost dropped the ball into their shooting hand, and they would just have to control it, get their guide hand off, and do what is now isolation drill out of that position. And so it was isolation drill with a catch, basically. And I guess it's good for. I would have argued at the time it was good for adding a catch and figuring out the problem of your catch isn't always perfect. But it wasn't as game representative as it could have been, and I think that's where I quickly moved on from that drill.
Because that's sort of an advanced catch and shoot motion to catch up around your face and move straight to the set point. That is quite a difficult catch, although isolation drill slows it down. Anyway, I do also want to note that you used the term back then when you were discussing that, which is a commentary on that was 20 years ago, which is a wild thing to think about, just in the context. So, I played golf today with a guy I haven't seen in 15 years, which was when I was almost done university. So anyway, also old.
Well,
Dave.
Before we move on, I just it cracks me up. So there were a couple of guys that were my first college players I worked with: Josh Feast, Mark Lynch, and Jamie Brown. And those guys, I'm trying to do the math. They would have been like around 20 years old. I think Mark was actually like 17 when we started working together. And I think I was like 26, maybe 28. And they used to tease me about being an old man. And now, still friends with two of them now. And now those guys are 12 years older than I was when they called me an old man. That's that. I'm sure most of the people listening are of one of our demographics, like mine or yours or older, and going yeah, obviously, but it's still funny how time just goes by, and I don't know, I'm getting a little nostalgic right now, I guess.
I like it, man. Listen, I'm turning 36 this year, which is not old. I'm aware that I'm still young, but to the college players I coach, they're like, I don't know the difference between Lil Baby and Da Baby, and that makes me old. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like that working with these people and being around young people is what kind of keeps you young at heart. Like, my daughters are super proud when I know like a little slang word that my wife will have no idea, but I'm just, I love that. I know I'm old, but like they're skewing me 5 years younger than maybe I even get 10, which still leaves me in the old category, but okay. He knows.
I would hazard a guess that you've listened to the whole new Taylor Swift album from start to finish, which makes you shade 10 years younger than you are, I would say. Not to get dragged into this conversation, but
I mean, yeah, maybe we need a mini pod on as we call her in my family, on the Swizz. Does anybody, like, that's so common language in our family? Like, I have a playlist on my phone titled The Swizz because my youngest daughter is a Swiftie. My oldest daughter doesn't quite get into that category, but she's also a fan, and therefore I need to at least know. And I legitimately like 8 to 10 of her songs. I think she's good. I'll admit it.
That is man enough of you to admit I like that a lot. I also like 8 to 10 of her songs, and I will agree. Coaching college kids, I know that Da Baby and Lil Baby are two separate people who make what equates to modern music. I don't know if I would call it that. However, I know that they exist, and I do not know which is which. However, that is not the most important thing. Dave, let's take a real quick break from this tangent, and we'll come back after this commercial with beginning of NBA Dave's career.
Hey there, basketball fans. I'm NBA shooting coach Dave Love, and I've got exciting news just for you. Introducing my exclusive, free basketball shooting newsletter. It's packed with insights and techniques straight from the hardwood. Have you ever wondered how NBA players improve their shots? Or how you could get to the next level, whether you're a college player, a coach, or a budding youth player? My newsletter brings all this and more directly to your inbox. Each edition is a deep dive into the world of basketball shooting. I'll share some of the tips and ideas that I use with my NBA clients, tailored for every level of the game. But wait, there's more. Subscribers receive exclusive monthly discounts on my online products. From training videos to personalized coaching sessions, you'll get it all for a fraction of the price. And the best part of all, it's absolutely free to join. So what are you waiting for? Elevate your game and join a community of passionate players and coaches from around the globe. Signing up is easy. Just visit CoachDaveLove.com.
Welcome back. Coach Dave, this is an ATO. We're going to put 24 up on the thought clock. I always point to the imaginary thought clock in my office, which I think is apropos of nothing. And Dave, please give us the concise version of what we just talked about.
And I'll try and expand on it too. Pre-NBA Dave Love would have done a poop ton of block practice, had a really good a pretty good understanding of how the feet affected the ball, but wasn't able to see the hands on the back of the basketball, did way too many linear progressions, and was trying to fit players into the ideal box rather than being able to help them with their specific habits. That's the beginning of my journey.
I love how you put that. You crushed it. You also implementing a pod gimmick of poop ton is like a behind the back pass or a nutmeg included in the set also. So good job by you. So when we think about Coach Dave then 10 years later, so Cleveland Cavaliers, Tristan Thompson changing free throw shooting hand, Dave Love. How is that different than what you're doing today? Let's get into that.
Well, at that point in my career, I probably would have, I can remember still doing way too much block practice and way too many linear progressions. But I was starting to understand the hand and the release and how that all worked together. And I was starting to almost accidentally play with non-linear pedagogy, like implicit learning and variable practice. It wasn't conscious, it wasn't educated yet. It was probably more like out of boredom and out of like trying to shake up the routine, doing that stuff without realizing that there was a science to this, and they had words and terms, and it had been researched. I wasn't at that level, but I was starting to kind of prep myself for figuring that out. And then I would say I was starting to become better at diagnosing what was truly causing a player to struggle. And then with some players, like if their skill level fit my skill set, then I was actually getting pretty good at helping specific players with specific kinds of habits.
So starting to understand the cause and effect of things, and not completely understanding how to implement some solutions for them, but sort of working your way through some of those accidentally almost.
Yeah, or in early stages of learning. Yeah, that like I can remember right around the time that I started working in Phoenix. So either like the year before the year I worked in Phoenix, or the year after, which would have been 2008, 9, 10, somewhere in that range. I can remember taking a photograph of a player at the University of Calgary. His name's Matt Leckman, who's one of like the happiest people on earth. And like, I can guarantee if I see Matt now, I'm probably going to come out of our interaction with a back injury, because he will probably tackle me and like bear hug, shake me around like a rag doll, just out of pure joy and excitement. He's just that guy. And I took a photograph of him from behind. This is when I would teach. I want the index finger on the middle of the basketball, but I didn't fully understand why I wanted that. And took this photograph of him, and I looked at the photograph, and it's almost like everything clicked into place in my brain. Like I had all the pieces all the puzzle pieces in my brain, but they just weren't in place. And for some reason, that photograph just clicked everything, where I'm like, now I get it. Now I could see that his thumb was supporting the left side of the ball exactly the same way that his pinky and his fingers were supporting the other side of the ball. And like, oh, that's why I teach this. If you'd asked me before that, I would have, if I had answered honestly to the question, why do you teach index finger on the middle of the ball? My answer would have been because that's what my mentor taught me to do. I didn't fully understand that. And then seeing that photograph, I can still remember. And it's even on an old, like, I think I could find it on my Facebook. Like it might go back that long, that back when I actually used Facebook. I think that was the first post I put on my business account.
It was on MySpace. No, I do remember the first couple of times you came to Moncton to do camps, you were teaching index finger on the middle of the ball. And I was like, that made sense to me. Because again, knowing what we know now, that is the middle of my hand. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And in my situation, that's perfect. I do remember like 4 or 5 years later, there was a couple years where I can't remember if I was traveling for work and missed your camps, or if you didn't come out for a couple years or whatever it was, and you were teaching middle of the hand, middle of the ball. And I was like, ooh, this is new. Dave, tell me more about this. You know?
Yeah. And so your confusion or your curiosity was because with seemingly more experience, I became more vague?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I've said this to a couple of people in my personal life when we talk about different fundamental things. And some of it's golf, where there is no hard and fast rule. There is a range of things that can work. And understanding that is sort of the gateway to learning, because every YouTube video you watch says this is the one solution to fixing your slice, or this is the one solution to fixing or adding a thumb flick, depending on who you are. You know, it just that, again, we talk about clickbaity stuff and whatever, but in your, I'm going to use the word wisdom or experience, however you want to put that. You've sort of added some allowances for people who will find some solutions that might not be for everybody, but are for them.
Yeah.
Question mark?
It's really I think it's the journey most people go through is you learn from somebody, you feel like you're an expert in early stages because you feel like you know information that other people don't know. And then everybody that doesn't teach or know that thing is wrong. And except they feel that strongly about their idea. And then with experience, you start to realize, oh, it's not black and white. And so going back to your initial point of, I started out saying index finger, and I was still in a vacuum. Start with the index finger and go from there. But with more experience and more confidence, start to say, no, okay, 10% of the time it can be this, or in these particular situations, it can be middle finger or split. So I'm now confident enough that I understand it's not black or it's white, it's somewhere in between. And I now have the skills to determine which is best for this particular person.
There is a longevity scientist named Peter Attia who has a great podcast and whatever else. If that's something of interest, check it out. He talks about these kinds of ideas as having strong beliefs loosely held, where you feel passionate and believe the thing that you're teaching until someone comes along and says, you know, maybe that's not optimal, or maybe that's not quite right. And I think a lot of people struggle with that because they've attached a piece of their identity to that part of their knowledge. And so if you challenge that, it's an attack on their identity, not on that idea. So not to get too philosophical and off topic here, but I do believe that as coaches and teachers and as people, we have to be able to have a little bit of conversation and dialogue, because there are awesome ideas to be held. You know, there are pearls to be found in every conversation. I happen to be lucky enough to have a lot of conversations with you, and I think there are a lot of pearls there, but just in my everyday life, if I was closed off to ideas, I don't think I would have half the enjoyment or experience that I do have, you know?
I love our knowledge becomes our identity in early stages. I love that. However you phrase that, I think that's right on the money, and that's going to be a clip for the podcast. So with the Matt Robertson Coach Matt Robertson podcast, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Coach Matt Robertson.
Hey basketball fans, Coach Dave Love here with an exclusive offer just for you, my personalized video shot analysis. Imagine having an NBA shooting coach analyze your shooting form, just like I do for the pros. That's exactly what you'll get with my video shot analysis. Here's how it works. You send me a video of your shot and I'll break it down frame by frame. I'll pinpoint your strengths and identify the areas of improvement and give you tailored advice to take your shot to the next level. You'll receive a comprehensive analysis designed just for you. Whether you're a beginner or an aspiring pro, my feedback will help you shoot with confidence and precision. It isn't just feedback, it's a game changer. With my video shot analysis, you're not just practicing, you're evolving, and every single shot counts. Ready to transform your game? Visit CoachDaveLove.com/store to learn more and get started. That's CoachDaveLove.com/store and look for video shot analysis.
And welcome back to the Coach Dave Love podcast. Truly the titular character. Coach Dave, 24 up on the thought clock. Give us a concise look at what we just talked about.
Early NBA, I was starting to understand the role of the hand and the specifics and the details within that. Starting to become better with nonlinear pedagogy and implicit learning versus explicit learning, mixing in a lot more variable practice. And I think I was becoming a lot better at helping specific players with specific habits rather than trying to fit them into the old square peg into the round hole, or vice versa, whatever is correct.
Awesome. Got a good look out of it. Got a nice wing three. I absolutely love that. Coach Dave, can you give us a look at when, just before we move on to the now piece, were the types of drills, other than the sort of block practice portion, were the types of drills and the layers that you're adding to these things very similar to what you're doing now? Or how much of that has changed over the last decade? Not just the philosophy, but the actual structural mechanics of what you're doing.
This was probably the phase of my career when I was coming up with, or trying to come up with, drills. And so a lot of like number 6 drill, hip tap drill. I'm trying to think of like drop in the bucket, boxing drill, like all these different little things that I would try to come up with to teach particular habits. That was probably when most of them were happening, when I was using them the most. And now, as we kind of move into this third phase of my career, I started to move away from drills, but like my layers and the drills were probably in that heavy in that middle phase of my career.
I also was going to mention that you once told me a story about a player who really, really hated block practice, but maybe that's a story for another day.
Oh, I don't even remember this one. Can you give me a hint?
Washington Wizards. Oh, man, there's a.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you want.
Yeah,
Anyway, I don't want to get into that rabbit hole, but it's a fun piece of NBA history. Blow the whistle, Jay-Z. Anyway, so Coach Dave, let's talk about current 2024, or actually, as you mentioned, after you met Chris Oliver in 2017, 2018. Take a look. Let's take a little walk down how that looks different, because I think that's where the benefit for most of the coaches listening lie, because most of us are doing what you were doing pre-2017. Some creative drill making, some layering, some variability and implicit learning, kind of, again, not accidentally, but just sort of through the experience. But this is where I really feel the meat of. And as the host, I do have to say, from an entertainment standpoint and story standpoint, this is excellent. But from a value, we should have the best information up front, right? So maybe this is a bad job by me. However, Dave, let's get into current NBA Dave, or current era NBA Dave, and the kinds of things that you started doing that really made a difference for your players.
Yeah, so I would have everything in the past up until this point would have been based on logic and progressions and linear, like get good at this, master this, move on to this, master that, move on to this. And that's, I would have argued the logic in that and assumed that the logic made it true. And was even unaware that there was research that shows that might not be the best way of doing it. Now, did it work? Yeah. As Chris Oliver said, like he never said anything's wrong. It's just, are there better ways? And so meeting Chris, I think the first thing that I learned was block variable and random practice. I had never heard that. And I realized all I did was block practice, which really just makes players less adaptable. And so my first growth opportunity that I seized was to start to look for ways to make everything more variable. Changing the distance, moving to a different spot on the floor, changing the direction of movement, like those sorts of things were like the first thing, because all of it, we all have routines. And I had 15 years of routine and ways of doing it. And just this fundamental change was like, oh man, I have to adjust everything. And it was a small adjustment, but an adjustment to everything that I did.
Was it a difficult battle at first? Like you start hearing this data and you start seeing this research. Were you like, oh, I feel okay about this? Or were you like, nope, this is great, jump in with both feet? Or was it sort of a gradual progression?
It was a little bit of both, where there were moments, like if you had video of me running a workout, where I probably would have been like rubbing my massive forehead, thinking, okay, I want to do this, but that's block practice. I want to make it more variable. What do I like? Everything had to become conscious. Again, I couldn't go into autopilot, and I couldn't I would have been so conditioned where it's like, okay, we're going to do 5 of these. I want 5 one durable jumpers going left. All right, we've done that. Now I need to balance it out. 5 one durable jumpers going right. Well, now we've done one side of the floor. We better do 5 one durable jumpers going left on the other side, and 5 one. And it would all have been block practice. And then to say, like, I have to get comfortable with this feeling messy. And that was probably the biggest thing. It didn't take me long, weirdly. Like I would encourage most coaches, it probably will take you a couple of workouts to start to go like, okay, this isn't that big of a deal, but it feels massive at the time.
Growth is uncomfortable, and your 3 workouts of just rubbing your face, going through the options, going, no, oh, okay, get at this. That is growth. That's a hard thing to implement on the fly in the moment, I think.
Yeah. And so the next once wrapping my brain around variable practice was just understanding like a non-linear pedagogy, that we don't have to master 8 before we move on to B, before we move on to C, that we don't even need to start with A. And that's the beauty of Chris's line from his podcast of whole part only if we need to, which still blows my mind. That like I still start with A and then move on to B quickly and see if I can jump to D, but then come back to B and then progress to E and then come back to D. And like, so I'm in a linear way still. I'm moving far more towards non-linear, but I do want to start to experiment with, start with E. Okay, do we need to go back? Can we just stay with E and grow from there? Can we just getting far more non-linear and getting comfortable with that?
Okay, real quick, for those out there who don't know what the word pedagogy means, that's just like learning theory or theory of teaching. Dave, can you please do 2 things for me? 1, explain whole part only if I need it. Just again, if people miss the Chris Oliver pod, because I think it's a really valuable thing to reiterate. Secondly, can you tell me what starting at E would look like for you?
Okay.
Just for a practical example.
So whole part only if you need to, in Chris Oliver's context, who is more of a head coach teaching the game of basketball, would be start with the game. Don't do a one-on-0 drill to teach the action or the skill and then build up from there. It would be start with the game and manipulate the constraints on the game so that we get that situation to occur, and we'll see if we can figure this out in the context of a game. If we can't figure it out in the context of a game, how much do I need to limit the game representativeness of the practice in order to explore that corner of the sandbox? That's what I believe Chris means. And so my context of that is like, start with the shot. I still go back to like isolation drill and I build up the shot most days. And Chris said to me that when he came to meet me in Las Vegas just this past winter, said, like, I'd encourage you to start with the end more. And I'm like, oh crap! Like, are you kidding? Because we all have our routines. So now I got to figure out, can I start with E? Can I just teach the full shot? And I did a workout last week, a first workout with a new player, where I tried to not give any advice and I tried not to do any drills. And
that seems like hard. You weren't coaching at all.
Yeah. And I told the person, right, like, I'm going to drive you insane today because you're going to be coming to me for answers, and all I'm going to do is ask you questions. And I'm going to let you explore the wrong things so that you learn that they're wrong, if they are in fact wrong, or maybe they work for you. And I need a lot more reps like that to figure out how to use that tool. But that's why I say, like, I'm moving towards a constraint-led approach. That's what I'm trying to coach more like.
Socrates would be thrilled with that, you know, rolling over at his grave, wherever he is. It's great stuff. I will say, in the Chris Oliver context, he said this really clean line that I loved, where talking about the global context, if you're trying to teach offense, constrain the defense. And if you're trying to teach defense, constrain the offense. And I think that's such a simple idea that encapsulates his, I was going to say strategy, but just his sort of ideology in a nice little, nicely wrapped, you know, bows. And I think that's great. I also was going to say, it's interesting because when you talked about pre-NBA Dave versus early NBA Dave, you had to scratch your head and figure it out on the fly, changing what you were doing. And again, 10 years later, or whatever the time stretch is, you're doing that again. And you're like, oh, everything, you know, the routines that I had and the drills that I had, you're not starting from zero, because obviously your knowledge and experience are so much greater than they were at that time. But from a concept perspective, you're having to retrain your brain to look at these situations differently, which I think, A, kudos to you for being open to that growth, because growth sucks sometimes and is uncomfortable. But B, I think just opens up a whole new, again, I'm so curious to see where your not only teaching ideology, but also methodology and, you know, we talk about periodization and the amount of, anyway, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I'm very curious to see where it goes.
As am I. And thank you for saying that, because that, you hope it makes a difference. And you have, I'll never know if it makes a difference. Like Josh Feast, the first guy that I worked with, improved quite a bit with me doing everything wrong. And so, I think that's a great testament to what Chris had said, which is, nothing's ever wrong. It's just, is there a better way? And I probably accidentally did a really good job of holding accountable to habits without really knowing what habits I was holding accountable to. I definitely did an excellent job of keeping things simple for a long time, and we can argue whether that was a benefit or detriment now. But it worked, and I'll never know if teaching that same player with these new ideas would have accelerated the learning or helped him to become a 90 and a 46% 3-point shooter. I can't go back and redo that. But as I think I've said a few times, really all I'm trying to do is figure out all the rules to blackjack so that I know when I'm dealt two aces, it increases my odds of winning to split them. And apparently splitting eights is also good. I didn't know that until a couple of years ago. And all of these, none of them guarantee I'm going to win the hand, but they all give me a slightly better chance. The more tools I can have like that, the better off I am.
I know that you're talking on the micro level, but you being willing to do this podcast is, I think, really, truly making a difference. And shameless plug, if you want to really let us know if we're making a difference, you can subscribe, rate, and review. Honestly, if something that we've said here today or that Coach Dave said here today really resonated and helped, reach out, send a DM on Instagram. I think that's where you're checking most of the messages. maybe.
I'm back to Twitter more.
To X.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
using Twitter
too.
more. Yeah, I'm using a lot of X. This just sounds terrible.
So bad.
It's a bad name.
It's also a dark place. Like, I try not to scroll too much. It gets dark quick. So I don't want to get too far out of it. We're not ready to wrap it up quite yet. But Dave, really quickly before we go, what advice would you give to people that are in those earlier phases of their career where you were pre-NBA and earlier in your NBA career? Like, what, if you could encapsulate it into a couple of ideas, like what kind of advice would you give them?
I think the best advice that I got was work with as many players as you can. Work for free for players because you will learn more from the players that they learn from you than they learn from you. And then while doing that, hold yourself accountable to you have to show and prove improvement. That we can't just fall back on, well, I feel like he got better, or he got better, the coach isn't using him right, or like, no, you need to be able to prove that you helped that player improve. And if you can't, that's your fault. And so by doing those two things, working with players and then holding yourself accountable, you're forced to develop new tools. The next piece of advice I would give would be do your research. And by do your research, I don't mean follow a whole bunch of people on social media. That's great. Do some of that. But I would say follow 4 people that are educated in their field versus follow as many shooting coaches as you possibly can around the world. I am actually ignoring social media because I find there's not a negative. Everybody's just cycling around the same ideas, and there's no there's very little educated original thought. We're just repeating what we saw somebody else do that got a whole bunch of clicks, and that's not coaching. That's building a social media following, and how much does that really matter? And then my last piece of advice would be, you've got to look for an advantage. You've got to look for something that makes you unique, that you do better than anybody in the world, especially if you have big goals. And so you have to look for holes in the system. Where are the blind spots in what you want to do? Where's the opportunity? What are the things that people should be paying attention to, but they're not? And you're going to have to be a renegade and a bit of a maverick to say, no, I think this is important, and other people aren't doing that. And you're going to kind of have to go against the trend, not for the sake of going against the trend, but for the sake you think it's the right thing to do. You think it's important, and then prove it. And I can't tell that. So people hopefully are going to listen to that, and then they're going to say, okay, what would be the next? What's the hole? What's the blind spot? I can't tell you that, because it's blind to me. I know what mine are. I know what I'm working on. That makes me unique and where I think the holes are. But I'm working to fill those right now. I can't tell you where the hole for you is. I'll give you a great example. Stephen Mervis is, you've heard enough stories about
Beef
Merv.
Dip, of life-changing beef dip fame.
I'm glad he'll be thrilled that's the story that he will honestly be thrilled. Stephen Mervis is an executive for one of the teams I've worked for, one of the smartest people I know. And he was a lawyer that wanted to work in an NBA front office. And so he took this kind of approach and looked for, where's the hole? And I'm not going to get it exactly right because this was his thing, and it's certainly not my thing. But he put together, not working for a team, but in his free time, he put together for every NBA team their salary, their payroll, and what it was going to project to 2 or 3 years down the road, so that he was able to say, you know, so and so is not going to be able to afford this particular player, and just put together these massive reports and sent them for free to every single NBA team, because he thought that was important, and he thought that's where a blind spot was. And 3 teams called him, and one kind of offered him an internship. And so that was his version. I've got mine. I'm not going to share it. I'm not going to tell you what I'm working on, where I think you know them, but I'm not going to share that necessarily with the audience. You got to come up with your own, and it takes time and effort and passion and hard work.
Coach Dave, I do appreciate your candid, sort of your candor. Thank you. That's the word I was not looking for, but a better word. Thank you. Thank you for your candor and your vulnerability in this episode. Not only talking about growth and potential some failure back there where like I may have let some players down or we don't really know, but also being willing to discuss your growth and yeah, I really appreciate that. And one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking was I don't want to throw stones from inside our glass house as we are creating content here, you know, but a lot of the stuff that you see online is all for the value of content creation, for the sake of content creation, not for the sake of teaching or anything else. And I appreciate that what we're trying to do is not that. So, Coach Dave, you continue to be a delight. This is one of my favorite episodes, actually. Thank you for your time.
Well, here, you got all sentimental, so let me say the same thing. Like, I love that you're involved with this. I think you're doing an excellent job being a voice of the people and slowing me down when I need to be slowed down, or getting me to clarify when I ramble on about something. And really, I like every weekend to talk to my buddy Matt for an hour. So thanks for being involved, buddy.
Listen, it's the pleasure is all mine, or mostly mine anyway. I know I make you laugh once in a while. To all of you out there who stuck with us for what is probably another hour-long episode, we really appreciate you sticking around. Please rate, review, subscribe. It really helps a ton. Track down Dave at Coach Dave Love on Instagram, X, Coach Dave Love, and subscribe to the newsletter to get some awesome stuff that I subscribe and read just about every time I get an email. So appreciate that. You can find me on X at Coach Matty Rob, and on LinkedIn, which is where I spend most of the time. But really appreciate you. The listener base is exciting, and we're really having a good time here. So thanks for coming out, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Coach Dave Love Podcast. To stay up to date with our future episodes, please remember to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to sign up for Coach Love's free shooting newsletter on CoachDaveLove.com, and be sure to follow him on social media. You can find him at Coach Dave Love.